Here. Next up, we've got John Bush from Austin. He's known for Operation Defuse, as well as being associated with Brave New Books and plenty of other things. He's going to come up here and tell you about. Please welcome John Bush from Austin, Texas.
Yeah!
You smell that in the air?
Yeah.
That's freedom.
Yeah.
And counterfeiting.
Yeah.
My name's John Bush. I'm from Austin, Texas. I've been involved with the Liberty/Truth movement for almost a decade now, and I've really learned a lot in that 10 years, and I've really evolved quite a bit. And today I wanted to talk with you guys about some strategies on how we can create a wholly free society, and also how we can end the Federal Reserve in the process. So I'm going to be talking about agorism today, which is a revolutionary libertarian strategy of market anarchism. Before I get to that, I just want to let you guys know what my personal goal is, why I'm here today, why I'm active, why I'm a liberty activist. I'm going to stop at nothing to see the creation of a wholly free society. And by a wholly free society, I mean a society, an environment in which individuals can live their lives according to their own ends, in which they don't have to ask permission in order to exercise their rights, in which they are able, again, to live according to their own values as long as they don't interfere with anybody else's ability to do just the same thing. And I know there's a lot of people in this movement who are hardcore, strict constitutionalists, but I would like to see us advance the ball beyond the Constitution, because I'm not so sure that the Constitution is necessarily compatible with a wholly free society. Check out Article 1, Section 8. It gives the Congress the power to collect and lay taxes. It also gives Congress, Clause 2, the power to take out credit, to borrow credit on the backs of the United States people. And I'm of the belief that an institution, a centralized institution that has that power, will inevitably become corrupted as it has today. So even if we restore the Constitution, who's to say we're not simply going to delve into the same tyranny that we're in today? Who's to say we're not going to get there quicker because the American public has their heads so far up their behinds today? I mean, when the Constitution was signed and ratified, only 10% of the inhabitants of the 13 colonies even consented to it. The other 90%, it was forced upon them. The people that wrote it, every single one of them, except for one or two, I think, owned human beings. They were privileged elitists, and in many instances they were looking to preserve their own interests and their own position of power. So again, I mean, I don't want to start off my speech with everyone being like, oh, this guy doesn't like the Constitution, what an a-hole, I'm not going to listen to him. But I just want people to realize that it shouldn't necessarily be the end. I mean, it was a great advance, a great step for mankind. It was the first time in civilization that we put down on paper our rights, and that the actual government, the institution, the controlling powers in society were constrained in paper, of course. But I think we can do better than the Constitution. I think we can create an environment where we are 100% free, and where there isn't an institution, a centralized institution with monopoly power. So I'm going to talk about a lot of different dichotomies today. One of them is monopoly versus competition. And I think at the root of all the evils and the biggest inhibitions for our individual liberty is that monopoly power that exists. It exists within the government itself. The Constitution created a massive monopoly of power, which is basically a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. And they're using it for illegitimate purposes. Now they're not even using it for the constitutional purposes that were enumerated within the Constitution. Monopolies come in all shapes and sizes. One of the monopolies that I hate the most is the monopoly that police departments enjoy on the provision of defense. Check out Houston Police Department. They beat the living crap out of the Houston citizens. It's absolutely sad. I see it on YouTube all the time. HPD is terrible. I guarantee if you opened up Houston Police Department to competition, and if you didn't force Houston residents to pay for the Houston Police Department, they would go out of business. There would be competing services. Either people would go ahead and start, open carrying firearms, even though that's unlawful here in Texas. How's that for Texas freedom, the great independent state of Texas? Yeah. Or people would use the money that they're not having stolen from them to pay for the corrupt Houston Police Department, and they would use that money to pay for a private defense agency. right? So that's an instance of a monopoly that harms our ability to live as free people. Another monopoly is the standing courts. You know, they say there's a problem with standing armies. I think there's also a problem with the standing court system. It wasn't until that much long ago in the history of civilization that there wasn't a standing court. Whenever someone harmed you, the two parties would come together and they would form a court on the spot. And usually they would go to one of the wise persons in the community. There wasn't standing courts that have now just become revenue-generating rackets that only exist to persist the income of everybody that works for them, the judges, the bailiff, the court reporter, the clerks, and everything like that. That's another example of a monopoly problem. And then I think the biggest monopoly that we face as Americans is the monopoly on the provision of money that the Federal Reserve enjoys. So the question is, how do we deal with these monopolies, which I see as an enemy of liberty? Monopolies take away your ability to choose. Absent a monopoly, people would be, oh, you know, I don't like Houston Police Department. They beat my cousin last week. I don't think I'm going to give them my money anymore. I'm going to go with another choice. But these monopolies, the state institution with its ability to force people to do things, it prevents us from choosing. So I think the best way to eliminate monopolies is through competition. Right? To compete with these monopolies, to break them up. So, essentially, whenever we compete with them, we provide an alternative that people can go to. And I'm here to tell you now, we don't have to ask permission in order to compete with these institutions. I don't think we should wait for the federal government to allow us to engage in competing currencies, or to come up with labor dollars, or to start bartering and trading with silver. And I don't think we should wait for the federal government to pass and end the Fed bill either before we start working to end it. I strongly believe that the Congress is not ever going to pass and end the Fed bill, because the Congress benefits immensely from the existence of the Federal Reserve. Remember, when it was created back in 1911, 1913, it was a partnership essentially between the Congress and the banks. They both helped each other out. The banks were helped by the Congress because the Congress gave them the ability to use their monopoly of force and guns and violence in order to allow it to exist and to subsist. And the Federal Reserve Bank helped the congressmen because they can push so many of their programs without having to raise taxes. So outside of Ron Paul and a couple others, I really don't think that they're going to pass and end the Fed bill. So what I recommend is that we end the Fed ourselves by stopping the use of Federal Reserve notes. I know it's difficult. I know our lives are dramatically intertwined with Federal Reserve notes. I'm sure every single person here gets paid Federal Reserve notes. Everybody buys gas with Federal Reserve notes and buys food. But one thing that we can do as a small step is to limit our use of Federal Reserve notes and to start engaging in barter and to start trading with silver. So that's essentially what agorism is all about. Agorism is a libertarian strategy that was enumerated by a guy named Samuel Edward Konkin in the mid-'80s. And he wrote a paper called the New Libertarian Manifesto. And essentially what agorism calls for is not competing within the state, but competing with the state. It calls for the creation of parallel institutions that are based on mutually beneficial voluntary associations, contracts, and relationships, not based on force, monopoly, power, and forcing people to do things at the barrel of a gun. Agorism encourages individuals to engage in black and gray markets. Black markets being activities that are illegal, like selling marijuana, for example, and gray markets are activities that are legal, but you have to get permission first. So an example of a gray market transaction would be going to get your hair cut from a barber that doesn't have a license, or going to get a massage, or using some sort of vitamin that happens to be illegal. So it encourages the creation of these competing economies. They call it the counter economy. And the idea is eventually we will grow the competing currencies and grow the counter economy and the alternative institutions to the point where eventually they'll actually compete with the state. And the masses will be left to say, oh wow, now I have a choice. Do I participate in this state society that's based on monopoly violence, forces me to pay 30% of my income every year to murder brown people abroad? Or do I participate in this wonderful, peaceful movement of free people that are peacefully interacting with one another and building actual value and actual wealth? That's the hope that I hope to see, because I tell you what, folks, there's a lot of people calling for revolution. They say, hey, we need a revolution. Let's take over the government. Let's take it back for the people. But what will happen, and I say this because it's happened all throughout history, is the revolution will simply be a series of revolving circles over and over and over again. So we'll throw the bums out, we'll replace them with ourselves, And then the institution, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I fear that we'll become the a-holes that we just threw out ourselves. And it'll only happen in a matter of generations. The institution has a tendency to do that, and it has all throughout history. So you want a revolution? Well, it's only going to be a matter of time before the government turns into the same corrupt tyranny that it always has been. That's why I'm not for revolution. I'm for peaceful evolution, which means we all ought to evolve beyond the need, the supposed need, for a monopoly state in order to provide the various services. We're all in agreement that we don't need the government to provide health care. We don't need the government to provide food. But what if we didn't need the government to provide defense? We don't need Houston Police Department. We just need to be armed. We need to have strong communities that are willing to take care of each other. We don't need the government to provide the provision of justice either, because it's never been about providing justice. It's always been about securing and protecting the privileged power of the elitists that wrote the Constitution in the first place. It's never been about justice for the little guy. We can start our own courts. We can start our own independent arbitration agencies. We don't need the state for those purposes. Some people say, well, we need the state in order to defend our borders, in order to protect us from foreign invasion. Well, we've never really done that here in the United States to begin with. Our military has never really been used for defensive purposes. It's always been used for force, aggression, and again, to further the interest of the same privileged elitists that wrote the paper and that control the institution this whole time. If there were to be a foreign invasion, then I think all the different people would come together and say, all right, we're going to have a compact, so we're going to fight off this advancement of the foreign invasion, foreign aggressor. Once we're done with that, we're going to disband it, and we're all going to go back to protecting ourselves in our community. So, I mean, I know it sounds like a radical idea because everybody's so used to being stuck in that box that government is absolutely necessary, that it's a necessary evil. I don't think it's necessary whatsoever, and I think it's been the biggest hindrance on the success and the progression of mankind that's ever existed in the history of civilization. So not only should we end the Fed, but we should end government too! Yeah! All right, so I'm going to read you guys a quote that it'll play into what I would like to encourage everybody to do in order to end the Fed through the strategy of agorism, not by asking permission or asking Congress to pass a bill that will limit their ability to stay in office, but by getting dirty, getting grassroots, and doing it ourselves. So this quote is actually from 1552, which just shows how long we've been involved in this struggle. And again, you know, I don't like to dog on the Constitution. I do appreciate it because it's the furthest we've ever come in the history of civilization to a genuinely free society, but I don't think it goes far enough. In 1552, Etienne de la Boëte wrote, "Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant to topple him over, but simply that you support him no longer. Then you will behold him like a great colossus whose pedestal has been pulled away, fall of his own weight, and break into pieces." So the key thing is the beginning. Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant to topple him over, but that you simply support him no longer. So I want everybody to have in their heads, every time you go to the gas station, you go to the grocery store, you do anything, every time you hand that Federal Reserve note over, you are providing value for the Federal Reserve note. A lot of people say, oh, the Federal Reserve note, it's not worth anything. It is worth something. It's not worth gold, it's not backed by anything, any commodity, but its value, what makes it money, is that individuals put value in it, they exchange it, so they see value in it. And every time we use the thing, we give it more value. And that's one of the most hypocritical things that we can do. Because if it wasn't for the value that the American public and the rest of the world, many of the rest of the world isn't giving it value anymore actually, and I don't blame them. If it wasn't for that value we created by using the damn thing, they wouldn't be able to print money out of thin air to finance foreign wars of aggression. We are empowering the Federal Reserve Bank every time we use the US dollar. Every time. And I know it's difficult. You can't snap your finger and stop using FRNs. We all have bills to pay. We all have jobs. Most of us have jobs where you get paid with the Federal Reserve note. But I strongly want to encourage everybody to start taking proactive steps to limit your dependence on the Federal Reserve note. And that's the way you end the Fed. If we all stop using the Federal Reserve notes and start creating competing currencies, the Federal Reserve will end itself. Right?
Yeah.
That's not to say the End the Fed stuff and the Audit the Fed isn't a wonderful educational tool to expose exactly how corrupt the institution is, but I think it's by time we take the power back into our own hands and we end the thing on our own. We've allowed it to exist for far too long. So one thing that people can do, and this is something that Catherine spoke about earlier, is start creating networks of individuals, businesses, and services that are willing to accept silver or any other commodity or even barter in exchange for their goods and services. We have one in Austin we started. It's called Black and Yellow Pages. You can check out blackandyellowpages.biz if you want to see an example. And we've found over 20 businesses and services that are willing to accept silver in exchange for their particular good or service. I think that'd be a wonderful thing that the Houston community, our numbers aren't big. We aren't the masses. Unfortunately, we are a minority that are open-minded like this, but a small, united, tight-knit community can do so much to end the Fed if we just simply come together. And next time your toilet goes out, before you open the phone book and look for the cheapest number on there, refer to your little barter network and say, you know, before I'm going to go give my value to the general public, I'm going to see if I can give that value to somebody within my own community first. So check out blackandyellowpages.biz for an idea. Another thing we're doing back in Austin is we are circulating these dime cards right here. It says End the Fed, and it's got a pre-1964 silver dime. I'm sure many in this crowd are familiar that they call it junk silver, which I think is going to be a big oxymoron here, are familiar that pre-1964 coinage, quarters, half dollars, and silver dimes are actually 90% silver. So this little dime right here, which used to be worth 10 cents, is now worth about $2.25 or so. So these cards, I have a pocket full of them. Come see me if you want to see about how you can get your hands on one of them. But it's a wonderful tool. On the back, it says, when silver is $40 per ounce, the coins are worth this much. So it's an educational tool. You keep one on your person at all times, and any time the discussion of Federal Reserve comes up, or ending the Fed, or sound money, you whip it out and you're like, hey, did you know that this used to be actually 10 cents? But since they've inflated the crap out of the currency, you know, now you can buy so much less for that. They're stealing our value, and we're letting them do it because we're allowing the system to subsist, and in reality, we're passing the buck. We're saying, oh, I'm just a person. I don't have the power to change things. I'll let my representative do it. That's what they're there for. I think that's hogwash, and I think that's allowed us to get to this problem. If you have to ask permission to be free, you're only proving how unfree you truly are. Right? We're very powerful beings. We're infinitely powerful, but they have us believing otherwise. They have us dependent on government and on representatives in order to make our lives better. And I think that's a bunch of hogwash. So I think the monopoly is the ultimate problem. There's a bunch of other instances besides creating competing currencies and competing institutions in that field. We got to break away from our dependency on hierarchical food production systems. I'm sure everybody here buys their food from the grocery store. If you have a yard, please consider growing a raised bed garden. Start. It's not that easy. A lot of people think, oh, when the collapse comes, I'll just start gardening then. No, it takes a lot to actually, you know, especially in this climate with the droughts and everything, it takes a lot of work to get it down. We're just barely getting off, and we don't have anything near enough food to feed ourselves at all, but we just feel good because we're actually doing it, we're actually learning it. So another thing that can happen with community, if there's anybody that are gardeners in the room, I know Derek Rose is a big organic gardening guy, you guys get together and start building, you know, maybe once a month, instead of going to the political rally, you go to each other's houses and build gardens in each other's backyards. Then you could start a network trading, you know, oh yeah, I didn't grow this season, you grew that, let's trade amongst each other, yada, yada, yada. Another way to compete with the monopoly institutions that are out there, as I alluded to earlier, is to create your own arbitration agencies. And whenever you have an internal conflict amongst yourselves, please, I beg you, do not go to the police, do not go to the justice system, but arbitrate it amongst yourselves. Find one of the older guys in the crowd who might be a little wiser than the rest of us, and ask him to go ahead and give an independent, unbiased conclusion about that. Another thing that is absolutely important and is probably the riskiest of all is to create competing institutions of defense. This can come in multiple forms, from a neighborhood watch to a militia group, or to something that we started in Central Texas, which is called Lone Star SMART. It's the Sovereign Mutual Aid Response Team. Essentially, it's a collection of individuals who are all committed to help and defend one another in the event that they come under attack from the state, or if they're just in need of mutual aid. It's essentially a mutual aid society where we've all committed to help each other out. And just recently, we launched the Lone Star Liberty Bell, which is a phone number you call, 512-34-UNITE. If you're you're ever pulled over by the police, if you ever see a checkpoint, if you ever see a speed trap, if you need help moving out of your house, if you're in need of any type of mutual aid, you call this number, you leave a short message, and then that message is then sent out to everybody that's subscribed on the network through their email, Twitter, text, or Facebook. We just launched it just recently in Austin. I'd love to come back here to Houston and help you guys set up one of those networks as well. Because a lot of the stuff we're engaging in, I tell you what, one thing I've learned in studying the Fusion Center systems, the Department of Homeland Security Information and Intelligence Gathering Systems, and the FBI and their COINTEL programs, that's something that I'm very interested in. I've done a lot of research on that. And they target those individuals and organizations that choose to opt outside of the system. They don't much have a problem with the people participating politically because they know they have them in their controlled system, in their controlled paradigm. You know, from the way that they solidify the Republican and Democratic parties to the electronic voting machines, they want us to participate in that system because they know they have us controlled. And they know that we're going to compete with them, but we're competing with them within their system. There will always exist that monopoly institution of force, which we call government. That's why, again, I encourage people to compete outside of the system, to compete with the system. And again, it's risky. It's very risky. That's whenever the FBI targets people. Whenever you have black separatist groups. Whenever you had the New Left in the 60s that were protesting the war. They started building their own institutions. That's why they were infiltrated by the FBI. That's why a lot of people don't do it. It's okay, I understand. It's okay to be afraid. I'm afraid all the time. They have guns. The police officers walk up to you displaying an open firearm. Most of them are very big. Most of them just came back from Afghanistan or Iraq, where they eye scanned everybody there, where they just beat people and murdered people with no accountability whatsoever, and now they're the ones that are enforcing the petty BS laws. So if somebody lit up at the park, an armed man would come and his gun would be there. If you decide that you don't want to pay your income taxes anymore, an armed man is going to show up and take you away. If you get busted for smoking a little grass, being a peaceful person, an armed man is going to show up and toss you in a cage. That's very scary and fearful. And I understand why people don't want to take that next step to totally opt out of the system and begin building our own institutions. That's why community is absolutely necessary if we are to find freedom in our lifetime. That's right. So again, in order to overcome the fear, we need to unite, we need to build organizations, build networks. We also need to get involved in philanthropy. We need to go out and clean up the messy creek down the road. We need to get the Houston Free Thinkers. I know you guys do philanthropy projects. We need to go to the local food bank and to give out food and stuff like that. That way, whenever we choose to live free, which is illegal these days, then the state comes and tries to harm us and they put one of us in jail, the rest of the community, instead of being like, oh yeah, you know, I read the Southern Poverty Law Center report. I'm sure glad that they took those evil right-wing extremists and put them in jail. They were disrupting order in this society. They're not going to think that. That's what the government wants them to think about us. What they're going to say is, oh boy, that was a really sweet young man. He's been volunteering for the past 6 months at the local food bank. I wonder why they would put such a peaceful person in jail. And then what eventually starts to happen is the state loses more face by putting us in jail because other people start to see through their veil, and other people start to see that the emperor wears no clothes, and that they don't give a damn about the little guy whatsoever, and that all they exist for is to preserve, again, their monopoly power and monopoly privilege. So that's essentially my message. Opt out of the system. We don't have to ask permission to be free. We don't have to ask the Congress to end the Fed. Instead, we can take necessary steps in our own lives to end the Fed. And in order to overcome the fear, I offer you these 3 points. There's strength in numbers, there's strength in unity, and there's strength in truth. And we have all 3 of those things on our side. So all we need to do is stand up, and they'll never be able to put us down. Thank you.